Today we're going to be talking about one of my favorite subjects, and that is granny squares. I'm going to be sharing my favorite yarns as well as a brand new app that I've been using. Hi, I'm Elise from the blog Le Petit Sans Crochet, and I love granny squares so much. I think it goes back to my early childhood when I was obsessed with the 1970s TV show Little House on the Prairie. Although there's no evidence that I could find that Ma, Laura, or Mary were crocheters, they did have these gorgeous, colorful quilts that adorned their little humble beds. Many years ago, I actually took a couple of quilting classes, and let's just say it didn't go as planned. And to me, granny squares have the look of old-fashioned quilts, but they are made with yarn, and they are so much easier, in my opinion. And if you're just getting started with granny squares, you may be overwhelmed with all of the yarn choices that you could use to make a granny square. Or maybe you're just bored with the yarns you've been using. But today, I'm going to be sharing my favorites for making granny squares, plus I'm going to give you a little bit of guidance if you are brand new to granny squares and you just need someone to tell you what to look for in a yarn. To make it onto my favorite yarns for granny squares list, it needs to be available in a lot of different colors, affordable, easy to find, strong, and washable. The first yarn that we're going to be talking about is the one that I am using to make this little granny square tablecloth. Although I'm not done with this project yet, I've made enough granny squares to know that I really love this yarn. This is the brand new Minikins from Premier Yarns. And when Premier Yarns sent me a big box full of this yarn, I literally gasped. That's a really hard word for me to say. Gasped. I gasped when I opened the top because it looked like there was a rainbow inside. All of these beautiful, gorgeous colors all together just took my breath away. The thing I really like about this yarn is that there are a ton of different colors and it is so incredibly soft. But let's talk about the specs of this yarn. It's 158 yards and 1.75 ounces. It's 50% acrylic and 50% cotton. It's a number 2 fine weight yarn and it comes in 42 different colors. Let's talk about the pros. This is such a soft yarn, but it looks so much like 100% cotton. And the addition of the acrylic actually makes it such a nice yarn to work with because it gives it that little bit of stretch so that it doesn't hurt my hands when I'm crocheting with it. I love the stitch definition with this yarn. It just looks so nice and crisp and gorgeous. And you can machine wash this yarn in warm water, but you are going to want to lay it flat to dry. Now let's talk about the cons. And to be honest, I don't have any negative things to say about this yarn. I absolutely love it. But the one thing to note is that it is a number 2 fine weight yarn, which I'm okay with. And I'm really loving having these very delicate little granny squares. And I'm not planning on making a huge blanket with them. I'm just making a tablecloth. But if that's something that's important to you and you want a project that you can work up super quickly, this might not be the yarn that you're looking for. There are lots of other yarns that I'm going to be sharing that will be good for that. But this one is a perfect one if you're looking for something a little bit finer, a little bit more detailed, and really gorgeous. I know I'm going to get asked this question. So these squares are actually from this book, Vintage Style Crochet Projects, and I'll leave a link for it in the description box below. The author actually used these squares to make a beautiful little bag, but I'm choosing to just make mine into a tablecloth. But I loved the squares and I thought they were really pretty, so that's what I'm using. Let's take a moment and talk about today's sponsor, Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform for creative-minded people. They have thousands of amazing classes in areas like crocheting, knitting, photography, painting, just to name a few. What's great is that Skillshare classes are all online. You can learn from the comforts of your own home, and they are all ad-free. One of my favorite classes is Modern Crochet Essentials for Getting Started by Tony Lipsy of TL Yarn Crafts. This is a fantastic class for crochet beginners, but it's also an amazing resource for those of us who've got a little experience, but we want to polish up our skills. This class has 14 different lessons that will help you to feel confident with your crocheting. And one of my favorite lessons is about blocking and aftercare. I get so many questions about blocking, and this explains exactly what it is, how to do it, and why it's important. And what's even better is that the first 1,000 people to click the link in the description box below will get a 1-month free trial to Skillshare. Make sure to check out all of their other crocheting classes. You'll even find some granny square classes in there. There's something for everybody. Thank you so much to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video. Recently, I made a granny square blanket for my brand new baby nephew. It was inspired by this gorgeous granny square blanket that Justin Bieber wore to a sushi date night out with his wife, Haley. And you heard me right. Justin Bieber actually wore the granny square blanket out, sort of like a coat or a jacket. It was kind of weird, but it was also really kind of fun to see Justin Bieber wearing a granny square blanket out in public. He was spotted again with another crocheted blanket, which is the Persian tiles design by Janie Crow. This one is so incredibly gorgeous. It's not a granny square, but I thought I would share it anyway because it's so beautiful. But the blanket that I made was just plain old basic granny squares, which I love. Those are so much fun to make. And I'll leave a link for the full tutorial and the free pattern in case you would like to get it for yourself. For that blanket, I used impeccable yarns from Michaels. And here are the specs of this yarn. It's 285 yards and 4.5 ounces. It's 100% acrylic. It's a number 4 medium weight. It comes in 61 different colors, and it's $4.99 per skein, full price. Of course, we're not going to buy yarn that is not on sale, but that is the full price. That's the full price. So let's talk about the pros. This is a great yarn for granny squares. Because it's a medium weight, it actually works up really quickly. And the other great benefit is that you can pop this into the washing machine and the dryer, which I did before I gifted the blanket to my brother and sister-in-law. It feels actually really nice and soft, and I really enjoyed crocheting with this yarn, and I think that the finished blanket turned out so adorable. I don't have it with me because I gave it to my brand new little baby nephew, who is so adorable. But the only thing to note, this is the only con that I will say, is that there isn't a tremendous amount of stitch definition. So if you're doing a lot of intricate work with your granny squares, this might not be the yarn that you want to use because you might not be able to see those little details really well. But if you're making pretty standard granny squares, this is going to be a great yarn for that. The next yarn is the Stylecraft Special DK. It's easy to see why a lot of granny square loving designers like Lucy from Attic 24 and Amanda from 8x6 love this yarn. I've made 2 different blankets from this yarn, the Harmony blanket by Lucy from Attic 24 and also the Granny Goes Large blanket by Cherry Heart. Here are the specs of this yarn. There are 322 yards and 3.5 ounces. It's 100% acrylic. It's a number 3 lightweight yarn. It comes in 89 different colors, and it's $3.99 per skein, full price. Here are the pros. This is one of my hands down favorite yarns to make granny squares with. First of all, it comes in so many gorgeous colors. I mean, 89 colors. That is amazing. Next, it is so incredibly soft and feels so good in your hands. You just want to keep touching this yarn. And it also has very nice stitch definition. Here are the cons. There aren't any. I have nothing negative to say about this yarn. It is wonderful to work with, and it is perfect for granny squares. The next yarn is DMC Natura Just Cotton. And I've made one beautiful blanket with this yarn. I made the Starburst Granny Baby Blanket from the Vintage Style Crochet Projects book, and every single one of the patterns in this book uses the DMC Natura Just Cotton. So I wanted to make my blanket exactly like the one she has in the book. And here it is. It really is a beautiful blanket. So let's talk about the yarn specs. It's 170 yards and 1.8 ounces. It's 100% cotton. It's a number 1 superfine weight. It comes in 40 different colors, and it's $5.99 per skein, full price. Here are the pros about this yarn. This yarn creates blankets that have a really gorgeous drape to them, and all of the colors are really beautiful. It's actually a combed cotton, and it has a matte finish, and I love that matte finish look. It is machine washable, but you will need to lay it flat to dry, and it has gorgeous stitch definition. But let's talk about the cons of this yarn. The biggest negative that I can say about this yarn is that it is very splitty. And when you take a close-up look at this yarn, you can see that it has 7 very fine plies that are twisted together. The plies actually feel more like thread than they do yarn, and it can be difficult to work with when you first start. Now, I eventually got used to it and ended up really enjoying this yarn, but I could see why people might really not like this yarn because of that very reason. But another con, and it just happened just a second ago, is my bracelet caught on one of the stitches and it actually pulled it right here, so you can actually see it. And that is kind of a big negative. It's probably at the bottom of my list of my favorite yarns for granny squares, but it definitely does make the list because I still think that this one turned out really, really pretty. My next favorite yarn is the Paintbox Cotton DK. I'm actually a big fan of the entire Paintbox line from Lovecrafts. They really have a lot of gorgeous yarns. I made a super sweet little decorative granny square cloth thingy. I don't know what to call it. It's almost like a table mat. I don't even know what to call it, but it's a very nice little decorative granny square piece that I love to keep right here on my antique cabinet. It goes really well with it. Here are the Paintbox Cotton DK specs. It's 137 yards and 1.8 ounces. It's 100% cotton. It's a number 3 lightweight yarn. It comes in 63 colors and it's $3.25 per skein, full price. One of my favorite things about this yarn is the matte finish. The colors are really beautiful and this is a nice soft cotton yarn. It also has beautiful stitch definition and you will be able to throw it in the washing machine, but you will need to lay it flat to dry. Here is my only con. I really don't use 100% cotton anymore and I actually gave away and sold all of my Paintbox Cotton DK because I had a ton of it, but it began to cause a lot of pain in my hands and my wrists and my elbows and my shoulders. Now, I do struggle with inflammation in my joints, so if that's something that doesn't bother you at all, go right ahead and use it. But if you have any sensitivities in your joints at all or your muscles, just know that 100% cotton can cause that fatigue and it can cause some joint pain. So that's the only reason why I don't use it anymore. I absolutely loved that yarn and I made lots of amigurumi toys with it and I loved it for granny squares as well. Paintbox also has other yarns that are great for granny squares, like the Paintbox Simply DK, the Paintbox Simply Aran, the Paintbox Cotton Aran, but they do have one other yarn that is not good for granny squares, and I'll tell you why. I made this beautiful, gorgeous granny square blanket from the Paintbox Wool Mix Aran. Now, you can use wool to make granny squares if that's something that you enjoy, but I found by making this granny square blanket that I do not like wool for granny squares. Now, this is very beautiful. It is very warm, but the problem is it's very, very heavy. This actually is tough to hold up in the air. It is very, very heavy. And to be honest, it's a little bit scratchy. So that's why I don't recommend the Paintbox Wool Mix Aran, because it's beautiful, but it's super heavy and it's a little bit scratchy. Now let's talk about this amazing app that my friend Danielle from the Instagram account Co4Stitchery told me about. It's called the Crochet Studio app, and it was created by Anita from Made by Anita and her son Matt. The core feature of the app is the Yarn Palette Maker tool. Imagine having thousands of yarn pegs in your pocket. It allows you to choose from real yarn images and arrange them into palettes. This is really useful if you're unfamiliar with the yarn colors and want to see how they will work together. It's not always easy to choose yarns from a sea of swatches on a website. Being able to see your color choices together will help to eliminate yarn doubt when buying online. This is a really great feature, and one thing to note is that there are actual photos of the yarn colors from the manufacturers. And 3 of my favorite granny square yarns are actually in this app, which are the Stylecraft Special DK, the Paintbox Cotton DK, and the DMC Natura Just Cotton. So you will actually see that yarn and all of that brand's colors. There is also an AI yarn suggestions tool. If you need some help choosing colors, you can use the AI tool. Add an image from your camera roll and the app will suggest yarn colors to match it. The suggestions can be filtered down to only your preferred yarns. Think of it as a starting point. You can add more yarns or remove any that you don't like, making the palette completely your own. This is such an amazing tool. I just think this is wonderful. You'll also find the color inspiration library. This is a feature that is great for those of us who just want someone else to pick the colors for us, but we want them all to be beautiful together. You'll find different palettes based on mood, seasons, or design. You'll find warm, cool, deep, bright, rainbow, pastel, vintage pastel, ombre, soft, nursery, neutral, spring, summer, autumn, winter, and Christmas palettes. And when you click on that color inspiration, it will actually show you all of the different color palettes that are in that library. There are so many and they are so gorgeous. Another really cool feature about the app is the pattern generator. You can actually take that color palette and then plug it into your granny square blanket and choose the different colors and where you want them to go. You can also change how many rounds are in each square. You can change the number of squares that will be in the width of your blanket, and you can also change the length. There is also another section called Discover. Discover is our dynamic crochet magazine. It's a carefully curated list of palettes, patterns, and interviews with crafters from around the world. And in the Filter Yarn section, you will find a list of all of the different brands of yarns that are great for granny squares. I hope you enjoyed today's video all about granny square yarns and that amazing app for us granny square lovers. Wasn't that so cool? But also don't forget to get your 1 month free trial to Skillshare. And I hope you all stay safe out there and happy stitching.